That was the moment I realized I hadn't given my daughter a business. I had given thieves a place to hide. I pushed open the glass door of Vivian's Blooms, the small, elegant flower shop sitting on the corner of Elm and 4th Street. The brass bell attached to the doorframe let out a soft, cheerful ring, exactly the way it had the day I bought the property. I had spent 40 years working as a corporate accountant and a forensic auditor. I lived a life defined by spreadsheets, tax laws, and tracking the quiet, invisible movement of money. When I retired, I didn't buy a boat or a house in Florida. I bought this shop, and I bought the small 3-bedroom house a few miles away. I gave them both to my daughter, Vivian. She needed a place to heal. 6 months ago, Vivian had lost her husband, Brandon, in a sudden car accident. It was the kind of tragedy that fractures a person's soul. She had stopped eating. She had stopped sleeping. She had retreated into a dark, silent corner of her own mind. Giving her the flower shop was my way of pulling her back into the light. Her mother, my late wife, had always loved flowers. She had always dreamed of opening a shop just like this one. I thought being surrounded by life, by soil and blooming petals, would help Vivian remember how to live. I hadn't visited the shop in 3 weeks because I wanted to give her space to run her own business. But today, I needed to order a large centerpiece for a local charity auction I was sponsoring. I walked in expecting to see my daughter standing behind the front counter, perhaps looking a little tired, but hopefully smiling. Instead, I saw a stranger. Standing behind the custom mahogany counter I had built with my own hands was a woman I had never seen before. She looked to be in her late 20s. She was wearing a highly tailored, expensive white blazer and excessive amounts of heavy gold jewelry. She was leaning against the counter, texting on her phone with a look of profound boredom, a half-empty iced coffee resting precariously close to a delicate orchid display. She did not look up when the bell rang. I walked slowly toward the counter, my old running shoes making no sound against the hardwood floor. I am not an intimidating man. I am 65 years old. I wear faded polo shirts, and I need reading glasses to see anything closer than arm's length. But my entire career was built on observation. I notice things that do not belong. And this woman absolutely did not belong. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quiet and measured. The woman let out a long, theatrical sigh, finally pulling her eyes away from her phone. She looked me up and down, clearly unimpressed by my attire. "If you are looking for the cheap bouquets, they are in the bucket outside," she said, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "If you want a custom arrangement, you will have to wait. I am very busy." "You are busy," I repeated softly, glancing at the phone in her hand. "And who exactly are you?" She straightened up, crossing her arms defensively. "I am Effie. I am the manager of this establishment. Who are you?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Manager. I had given this business to Vivian completely debt-free. The inventory was paid for. The rent was covered for 2 years. It was a one-woman operation designed specifically so she wouldn't have to deal with the stress of managing employees. Before I could ask another question, the heavy wooden door leading to the back workroom swung open. Vivian stepped out, my heart seized in my chest. The woman standing in front of me was a ghost of the vibrant, beautiful daughter I had raised. She was alarmingly thin, her cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath pale skin. Her eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with deep, dark circles that spoke of weeks of sleepless nights. She was wearing a stained, dirty canvas apron over a wrinkled t-shirt. Her hands that used to play the piano, were covered in deep stitches from handling rose thorns without gloves. She looked up. When she saw me standing in the lobby, she froze. "Dad," Vivian whispered. Her voice was barely a rasp. Effie snapped her fingers, not even looking at Vivian. "Hey, did you finish processing that delivery of hydrangeas? Because they need to be in the cooler before lunch. Stop standing around." Vivian flinched. She actually flinched at the sound of this stranger's voice. As she instinctively reached up to adjust the collar of her shirt, her sleeve slid back. On her pale, thin wrist, I saw the distinct, ugly purple shape of a bruise. It was the shape of fingers. Someone had grabbed her. A cold, terrifying stillness washed over me. It is the same stillness I feel when I look at a corporate ledger and suddenly realize that millions of dollars have been stolen. It is the absolute absence of emotion, replaced entirely by calculated focus. Vivian, a third voice echoed from the back room. It was a voice I recognized immediately. It was the sweet, sickly, utterly manufactured tone of Beatrice Quinn. She was Brandon's mother, my daughter's mother-in-law. Beatrice stepped through the doorway. She was 60 years old, wearing a pristine pale blue cashmere sweater and a string of pearls. She looked like a woman who spent her afternoons at country clubs, complaining about the quality of the mimosas. "Vivian, sweetheart," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with weaponized maternal concern. "You are moving too slowly today. We have 3 major orders due by 2 o'clock. You know Brandon would be so disappointed if he saw you slacking off like this." The psychological cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. She was using her dead son as a whip to keep my grieving daughter in line. Beatrice finally looked up and saw me standing by the counter. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine panic, before the polished, grieving mother facade snapped back into place. "Frank!" Beatrice exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh, Frank, what a surprise! We didn't expect you." "I can see that," I said. My voice did not rise. I did not yell. I did not reach across the counter and grab the woman who was clearly running my daughter's shop. We are just helping Vivian," Beatrice said quickly, stepping between Vivian and me. She placed a hand on Vivian's shoulder, her fingers gripping the fabric just a little too tightly. She has been so overwhelmed since Brandon passed. She couldn't handle the stress of the business. So Effie, she is my niece, and I stepped in to take the burden off her shoulders. "We are a family, Frank. We have to take care of each other." I looked at Beatrice. I looked at the arrogant woman behind the counter. And then I looked at my daughter. Vivian was staring at the floor, her shoulders slumped, entirely defeated. She looked like a prisoner of war. If I had been a younger man, or a more foolish man, I would have exploded. I would have screamed at Beatrice to get out. I would have called the police to report a trespasser. But I knew exactly how that would play out. Beatrice would cry. She would play the victim. She would say I was attacking a grieving mother. And because I did not know what legal paperwork had been signed in my absence, I might have inadvertently made things worse for Vivian. "I see," I said simply. "I just came to buy a few loose roses, but it looks like you are too busy." I turned around and walked out of the shop. I walked down the block, bought a cup of coffee from a corner bakery, and sat in my car. I sat there for 6 hours watching the front door of the flower shop. I watched Beatrice leave at noon for a 2-hour lunch. I watched Effie sit behind the counter, doing nothing. And I watched my daughter carry heavy buckets of water and soil out to the back alley, alone. At 7 o'clock that evening, the shop finally closed. Beatrice and Effie drove away in a brand new Lexus SUV that I had never seen before. Vivian locked the front door and began the long walk to the bus stop because her car was nowhere to be seen. I pulled my car up to the curb and rolled down the window. "Get in," I told her. She got into the passenger seat. The moment the car door closed, the dam broke. She covered her face with her scarred hands and began to sob. It wasn't a gentle cry. It was the agonizing, chest-heaving weeping of a woman who had been utterly broken. I drove us in silence to a quiet park overlooking the lake. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, and waited for her to catch her breath. "Tell me," I said quietly. Vivian wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her dirty apron. She couldn't look at me. The shame radiating from her was almost palpable. "It happened 2 weeks after the funeral," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling. "Beatrice came to the house. She was crying. She said she missed Brandon so much, and she wanted to feel close to him. She started coming over every day." I nodded, letting her speak. Then she started coming to the shop, Vivian continued. At first, she just brought me lunch. Then she started looking at the books. She told me I was doing everything wrong. She said I was losing money, that I was ruining the gift you gave me. She said Brandon would be ashamed of how weak I was. The anger in my chest was a cold, hard knot. I was so tired, Dad. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Beatrice brought a lawyer to the shop. She said it was just a temporary arrangement to help me manage the finances while I grieved. She put the papers in front of me, and she told me if I didn't sign them, she would know I never truly loved her son. A power of attorney, I stated. Vivian nodded miserably. Yes, as soon as I signed it, everything changed. She changed the locks on the back office. She brought in her niece, Effie, to manage the front. She brought in Brandon's brother, Joachim, to handle the accounting. They took my company credit card. They took the keys to the shop. And the bruise on your wrist? I asked softly. Vivian pulled her sleeve down. Joachim. I tried to look at the ledger last week because vendors were calling, saying they hadn't been paid. He grabbed me and shoved me out of the office. He told me I was just an employee now. They had completely stripped her of her autonomy. They had weaponized her grief, manipulated her guilt, and systematically staged a hostile takeover of the business I had built for her. They had turned her into an unpaid servant in her own store. I'm sorry, Dad, Vivian sobbed, looking down at her scarred hands. I'm so sorry. I lost it. I lost the shop you gave me. I reached across the console and gently placed my hand over hers. You haven't lost anything, Vivian, I said. My voice was entirely calm. It was the voice of an auditor who had just found the loose thread that would unravel the entire sweater. They think ownership is about who stands behind the counter and who yells the loudest. They are wrong. Ownership is about paper. It is about numbers. Vivian looked up at me, her red eyes filled with confusion. What are we going to do? Beatrice said if I try to kick them out, she'll sue me. She said she has legal control. I looked out at the dark water of the lake. I spent 40 years following money, Vivian, I said quietly. When someone steals from my family, I don't get angry first. I get organized. And I am going to tear their entire lives apart, dollar by dollar. I turned to look my daughter directly in the eyes. Here is what is going to happen, I instructed. For the next 14 days, you are going to go to that shop. You are going to do exactly what they expect. You will smile. You will work. You will say nothing. You will let them think they have completely won. And what are you going to do? She asked, a tiny flicker of hope returning to her voice. I am going to do what I do best, I replied. I am going to follow the money, and when I am finished, they are going to wish they had never heard our names. For the next 14 days, my daughter played the hardest role of her entire life. She woke up at 5 in the morning, walked to the bus stop in the freezing rain, and worked 12-hour shifts under the cruel, watchful eye of her dead husband's mother. She arranged flowers. She carried heavy bags of soil. She scrubbed the floors. And she did it all with her head bowed, playing the part of the broken, subservient widow to absolute perfection. Beatrice was entirely convinced she had won. She walked around the shop like a queen surveying her conquered territory. While Vivian kept them distracted on the front lines, I went to work in the shadows. When you spend 40 years conducting front audits for massive corporations, you learn a very specific set of skills. You learn how to look past the surface noise and find the silent, undeniable truth hidden in bank statements and tax filings. Liars will always try to manipulate your emotions. Numbers, however, have no feelings. Numbers do not lie. My first stop was the office of a private investigator I had used for corporate espionage cases in the past. I didn't need him to follow Beatrice. I needed him to run a comprehensive background check on Joachim, the brother-in-law who was suddenly acting as the shop's chief accountant. Within 48 hours, the investigator handed me a manila folder filled with public records. The picture was incredibly clear. Joachim was not a successful businessman stepping in to help his grieving sister-in-law. Joachim was a man drowning in a sea of personal financial ruin. He had 2 maxed-out credit cards, a massive outstanding loan on a failed sports bar venture, and a heavily mortgaged house. He was a desperate man, and desperate men are always the sloppiest criminals. My second stop was the office of a highly aggressive corporate litigation attorney named Sarah Vance. I sat across from Sarah in her high-rise office, sliding a copy of the power of attorney document across the desk. I had instructed Vivian to sneak into the back office during her lunch break and take clear photos of every legal document she could find in Beatrice's unlocked desk drawer. Sarah reviewed the document carefully, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. "It is a standard general power of attorney," Sarah said, setting the paper down. Beatrice used a mobile notary. It grants her the authority to make financial decisions on Vivian's behalf, access her bank accounts, and manage the business. "Can she sell the property?" I asked. "No," Sarah replied. "The deed to the building and the house are solely in Vivian's name. A standard POA doesn't grant the proxy the right to liquidate real estate without a separate, explicit directive. But she can absolutely drain the operating accounts dry." "How hard is it to break?" I asked. Sarah smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Frank, a power of attorney is not a guardianship. It does not mean Vivian is legally incapacitated. As long as Vivian is of sound mind, she can revoke this document at any moment with a single notarized signature. Beatrice's authority vanishes the second we file the revocation with the bank." "Good," I said, "but we are not going to revoke it yet. If we revoke it now, she will claim she was just managing the business poorly. I don't want her to look incompetent. I want her to look like a criminal." For the next 10 days, the trap slowly closed. Vivian became my inside operative. Every evening, just before closing, while Beatrice and Effie were busy admiring themselves in the mirrors or trying on expensive clothes they had ordered online, Vivian would slip into the back office. She used her phone to photograph everything Joachim left on the desk. She photographed the shop's monthly credit card statements. She photographed the vendor invoices. She photographed the bank ledgers. Every night, she would come to my house, and we would sit at my kitchen table, printing out the photos and matching the numbers. The scale of the theft was staggering. Joachim was actively cooking the books. He was generating fake financial reports, showing massive losses in inventory and high overhead costs, which he used to justify why Vivian wasn't receiving a paycheck. But the bank statements told the real story. The shop's high-limit commercial credit line, which I had secured for Vivian to handle large corporate events, was completely maxed out. I traced the charges one by one, highlighting them in bright yellow marker. There was a massive down payment and monthly lease charges for a brand new Lexus SUV, the exact car I had seen Beatrice and Effie driving. There were thousands of dollars charged at high-end department stores for Michael Kors handbags, cashmere sweaters, and designer shoes. There were weekly charges of $500 at a luxury day spa downtown. There were exorbitant dinner tabs at steakhouses, and most damning of all, there were massive, unexplained cash withdrawals happening every Friday afternoon. Thousands of dollars pulled directly from the shop's operating account and disappearing into thin air. I didn't need to be a genius to know that cash was going straight into Joachim's pocket to pay off his failing sports bar debts. They were using my daughter's grief as an ATM. Beatrice was stealing the money to fund the wealthy country club lifestyle she felt she deserved. Effie was get a free ride, and Joachim was using the business as his personal bailout fund. "Look at this," Vivian whispered one night, sitting at my kitchen table, pointing at a line item on the bank statement. Her hands were shaking. "This charge, $800 at a jewelry store. It was made on the day of Brandon's birthday. She bought herself a necklace using my shop's money on the day we were supposed to be mourning him." I looked at the tears welling up in my daughter's eyes. It was no longer just the sorrow of a grieving widow. It was the white-hot spark of genuine anger. She was finally waking up. The spell of guilt Beatrice had cast over her was breaking, replaced by the realization that she had been used. "Are you ready to stop being their victim?" I asked her quietly. Vivian looked at the yellow, highlighted bank statements spread across the table. She looked at her scarred, bruised hands. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in 6 months, she sat up perfectly straight. "Yes," Vivian said. Her voice was steady. "I want my shop back, Dad." "You are going to get it back," I promised. "But first we are going to rattle the cage." The next morning, I did not go to the flower shop. I went to the local field office of the State Department of Revenue. When you possess undeniable, documented proof of massive financial discrepancies, tax authorities do not move slowly. They move with the terrifying speed of a bureaucratic predator. I submitted a highly detailed, anonymous whistleblower complaint regarding severe tax irregularities, commingling of personal and corporate funds, and fraudulent accounting practices at Vivian's Blooms. 2 days later, on a busy Friday afternoon, the hammer fell. I was parked across the street from the flower shop, watching the front door through a pair of binoculars. At exactly 1 o'clock, 2 men wearing dark suits and carrying heavy black briefcases walked into Vivian's Blooms. They were not there to buy roses. They were auditors from the Department of Revenue, conducting an unannounced, targeted field inspection based on a credible complaint of financial fraud. Through the glass window, I watched the chaos unfold. Effie, sitting behind the counter in her usual state of arrogant boredom, suddenly stood up, looking terrified as the men flashed their badges. She scrambled to pick up the phone. 10 minutes later, Beatrice's new Lexus SUV came screeching up to the curb. She practically fell out of the car. Sprinting into the shop, her pristine, polished facade was completely gone. Through the window, I could see her waving her arms frantically, talking to the auditors, pointing toward the back office. She was panicking. The illusion of her control was cracking. She knew that if official government auditors looked closely at Joachim's fake ledgers, the entire criminal enterprise would instantly collapse. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Vivian's number. She answered on the first ring. She was standing in the back workroom, out of sight of the auditors. "They are here," Vivian whispered, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Beatrice is losing her mind. She told the auditors she doesn't handle the taxes, that she just helps manage the floor. She is already trying to blame Joachim." "Good," I said smoothly. "Let her panic. Let her realize she is not as smart as she thinks she is. Your 14 days are up, Vivian. Clock out and go home." "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. I smiled, staring at the panicked, greedy woman pacing back and forth inside the flower shop I had built. "Tomorrow," I said, "we take everything back." The trap we had spent 2 weeks meticulously constructing was finally ready to spring. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, while Beatrice was likely sitting in my daughter's house drinking her imported coffee, Vivian and I were sitting in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Sarah Vance's law firm downtown. Sarah placed a single sheet of paper in front of Vivian. "This is the formal revocation of power of attorney," Sarah explained, tapping a silver pen against the document. "The moment you sign this, Beatrice Quinn's legal authority over you, your business and your finances ceases to exist. It is completely null and void." Vivian did not hesitate. She picked up the pen and signed her name with a steady, forceful hand. Sarah immediately handed the notarized document to her paralegal. "File this with the county clerk right now, and fax the certified copy to the commercial bank. I want all external access to Vivian's Blooms locked down within the next 15 minutes. "It's done," I told Vivian quietly as we walked out of the law firm. The financial blackout was instantaneous and absolute. At 8:15, the bank froze the high-limit credit line. They locked the online portal. They canceled the physical debit cards assigned to Joachim and Beatrice. Within an hour, I had remotely accessed the shop's point-of-sale system and changed every administrative password. By the time Beatrice, Joachim, and Effie arrived at the flower shop at 9:30 to begin their day of doing absolutely nothing, they were walking into a fortress. I had arrived at the shop 30 minutes earlier with a locksmith, completely replacing the front and back door deadbolts. I had also brought 2 large, unsmiling private security contractors wearing black suits and discreet earpieces. They stood on either side of the glass front door, their arms crossed. I stood inside the shop with Vivian and Sarah Vance, watching through the front window as the shiny new Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb. Effie got out first, carrying her iced coffee. She walked up to the front door and pulled the handle. It didn't budge. She rattled it again, looking annoyed, before finally noticing the 2 massive men standing on either side of her. Beatrice stepped out of the driver's side, frowning. "Effie, what is the holdup? Open the door. The florists are supposed to be delivering the tulips in 10 minutes. The key doesn't work," Effie complained, jiggling the lock. Joachim got out of the back seat, looking irritated. He walked up, shoved Effie aside, and jammed his own key into the cylinder. It refused to turn. From inside the shop, I nodded at the security guard on the left. He reached over and unlocked the deadbolt, pulling the heavy glass door open, just enough to allow Sarah Vance to step out onto the sidewalk. I stepped out right behind her, standing silently in the doorway. Beatrice looked at Sarah, then looked at me. Her eyes widened in sudden, sharp confusion. "Frank," Beatrice demanded, planting her hands on her hips, "what is the meaning of this? Why are the locks changed? Who are these men?" Sarah Vance did not introduce herself politely. She stepped forward and pressed a thick, sealed legal envelope directly against Beatrice's chest, forcing the older woman to take it or let it fall to the sidewalk. "Beatrice Quinn," Sarah said, her voice projecting the cold, undeniable authority of a corporate litigator. "I am the legal counsel representing Vivian Adams and her business entity, Vivian's Blooms. Effective as of 8 o'clock this morning, your power of attorney has been fully and permanently revoked. You no longer possess any legal, financial, or managerial authority over this establishment." Beatrice stared at Sarah, completely stunned. The words seemed to bounce off her polished exterior. "Revoked? You can't revoke it. Vivian signed it. She gave me control." "A power of attorney is a proxy, Mrs. Quinn," Sarah corrected sharply. "It is not a transfer of ownership. Vivian retains full ownership of this business, and she has terminated your proxy. If you or your associates attempt to enter this building, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Joachim's face turned an ugly, mottled red. The realization that his personal ATM had just been shut off hit him like a physical blow. He stepped forward, aggressively invading Sarah's personal space. "Listen to me, you corporate hack," Joachim snarled, pointing a thick finger at Sarah's face. "I am the chief financial officer of this company. All the ledgers are on my computer inside that office. You can't lock me out of my own workspace." He lunged forward, trying to push past Sarah to reach the open doorway. He didn't even make it one step. The security guard on the right moved with terrifying, fluid speed. He stepped directly into Joachim's path, placed a massive hand flat against Joachim's chest, and shoved him backward. Joachim stumbled over his own feet and crashed hard onto the concrete sidewalk, his expensive sunglasses flying off his face. "Do not touch her again," the security guard warned, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. His hand hovered casually near his hip. Beatrice gasped, rushing to help Joachim up. "You are assaulting him." "I will call the police. I will have you all arrested." "Call them," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it carried perfectly across the cold morning air. "Call the police, Beatrice. Let them come down here. Let them look at the accounting ledgers we secured from the back office last night. I am sure the Department of Revenue auditors, who visited you on Friday, would love to share their preliminary findings with local law enforcement. Beatrice froze. The mention of the tax auditors completely shattered her outrage. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking old and suddenly very fragile. She realized, in that exact second, that I knew everything. But she still had one weapon left. She still had her dead son. She looked past me, into the dim interior of the flower shop. She saw Vivian standing near the front counter, watching the confrontation. "Vivian!" Beatrice screamed, her voice taking on the shrill, theatrical pitch of a deeply wronged mother. She pushed past Joachim and stood directly in front of the security guards, glaring into the shop. "Vivian, come out here! Tell these men to let me in. How can you do this to me? I am trying to save you from bankruptcy." Vivian did not move. "Brandon is watching you right now, Vivian," Beatrice yelled, tears suddenly streaming down her face. It was an incredible performance. He is in heaven, and he is crying. He is crying because his wife is throwing his own mother out into the street. How could you betray his memory like this? It was the exact same emotional manipulation she had used to force Vivian to sign the paperwork in the first place. For 6 months, those words had been a heavy chain wrapped around my daughter's neck, forcing her to bow her head and endure the abuse. I held my breath. I didn't say a word. I didn't step in to defend her. This was not my battle to fight. If Vivian was going to survive this, she had to break the chain herself. Slowly, deliberately, Vivian stepped out of the shadows of the shop. She walked past me. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, standing shoulder to shoulder with the towering security guards. She looked at her mother-in-law. She looked at the woman who had bruised her wrist, stolen her money, and weaponized her dead husband's memory. Vivian did not cry. She did not bow her head. "Brandon is not crying, Beatrice," Vivian said. Her voice was no longer a terrified whisper. It was clear, steady, and remarkably strong. "Brandon would be disgusted by what you did to me. He would be disgusted that you used his name to steal from the woman he loved." Beatrice stared at her, her mouth opening and closing in absolute shock. The submissive, broken widow was gone. "This is my shop," Vivian stated, looking Beatrice directly in the eyes. "My father bought it. My name is on the deed. You are not the manager. Joachim is not the accountant. You are thieves, and you need to leave right now." It was the most beautiful thing I had heard in 6 months. She had found her voice. She had reclaimed her territory. Beatrice's jaw trembled. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a cold, venomous glare. "You ungrateful little bitch," Beatrice hissed. "You think you can just lock me out? I have contracts. I have vendor agreements. I will drag you through civil court for years. I will sue you until you have to sell this miserable little flower shop just to pay your legal fees." Sarah Vance let out a short, sharp laugh. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker, legal envelope. She handed it to Joachim, who was still brushing dirt off his suit. "That is a formal demand letter," Sarah explained cheerfully. "It details exactly $47,300 in misappropriated corporate funds. It includes the down payment for the Lexus, the unauthorized spa visits, the jewelry, and the cash withdrawals used to service Joachim's personal sports bar debts." Joachim looked down at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "You are not going to sue us in civil court, Beatrice," I said, stepping forward so I was standing directly in front of her. "Because if you do not sign a confession of judgment and agree to repay every single stolen dollar within 30 days, I am going to hand that forensic audit to the district attorney. I will ensure that both of you are prosecuted for felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse." Beatrice looked at me. She looked at the thick envelope in Joachim's shaking hands. The threat of a lawsuit had entirely evaporated, replaced by the very real, terrifying threat of a federal prison sentence. You can't prove any of that." Beatrice stammered, but her voice lacked any conviction. She was terrified. "I spent 40 years following money, Beatrice," I said coldly. "I can prove exactly what you had for lunch last Tuesday using my daughter's money. I gestured to the 2 security guards. If they are still standing on this sidewalk in 60 seconds, call the police and press charges for trespassing. I turned around, placed my hand gently on Vivian's back, and walked with my daughter back into her flower shop. The security guards stepped backward, pulling the heavy glass door shut and locking the deadbolt with a loud, final click. Through the glass, I watched Beatrice, Joachim, and Effie standing on the sidewalk. They looked completely lost. The fortress they thought they had stolen had just raised its drawbridge, leaving them outside with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a massive, undeniable legal debt. "She told you to take her to court," I said to Vivian, watching Beatrice finally turn and walk toward her illegally funded Lexus. So we did. Locking Beatrice out of the flower shop was not the end of the war. It was merely the opening salvo. For 6 months, Beatrice had systematically invaded every corner of my daughter's life. She hadn't just stolen the business, she had also moved herself, Joachim, and Effie into the large 3-bedroom house I had purchased for Vivian. They treated it like a luxury hotel. They slept in the guest rooms, ate the food Vivian paid for, and left the house in a constant state of disarray, completely unbothered by the fact that they were living under someone else's roof. It was time to take the house back. The morning after the confrontation at the shop, Sarah Vance drafted a formal 30-day eviction notice. Because there was no lease agreement, and because Beatrice and her family had never paid a single cent in rent, they were legally classified as month-to-month tenants at sufferance. I did not send the notice through the mail. I hired a specialized process server, a massive man who looked like he could bend steel with his bare hands, to tape the notice directly to the front door of Vivian's house while Beatrice was standing in the living room. The reaction was immediate, and it was entirely predictable. My cell phone rang at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon. I didn't answer it. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, Vivian's phone rang. We were sitting in the back office of the flower shop, sorting through the chaotic mess Joachim had left behind. Vivian looked at the caller ID. It was Beatrice. "Put it on speaker," I instructed softly. "Do not argue with her. Let her speak." Vivian pressed the green button and set the phone on the desk. "Vivian." Beatrice's voice exploded through the tiny speaker, trembling with a mixture of rage and hysterical grief. "An eviction notice. You are sending an eviction notice to the mother of your dead husband. Are you completely out of your mind?" Vivian's hand hovered over the desk. The old programming was still there. The instinct to apologize, to placate the angry mother-in-law, flared up for a brief second. "Beatrice, the house belongs to me," Vivian said, her voice shaking slightly. "That house belonged to Brandon," Beatrice screamed back. "It was his home. I am his mother. I am sleeping in the room where my son used to stay when he was a boy. You are throwing me out onto the street? You are a monster, Vivian. You are a cold, heartless monster. Brandon is looking down right now, and he is ashamed of the woman you have become. It was the ultimate toxic guilt trip. She was desperately trying to reforge the chains she had used to control Vivian for the last half year. I looked at my daughter. I saw the tears pooling in her eyes. The emotional manipulation was incredibly effective because Vivian's grief for Brandon was still so raw, so unresolved. She looked at me, a silent plea for help. I leaned forward and spoke clearly into the phone's microphone. "The house did not belong to Brandon," I said coldly. "The house belongs to Vivian. The deed is in her name. The mortgage is paid off. You are not a grieving mother seeking shelter, Beatrice. You are a squatter who has overstayed her welcome. You have 29 days left to vacate the premises, or the sheriff will physically remove you." I reached over and ended the call. Vivian buried her face in her hands. "Dad, she makes me feel like I am doing something evil, like I am punishing her for Brandon's death." "You are not punishing her for Brandon's death," I said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are punishing her for stealing $47,000 from you. Never forget what she did to you when she thought no one was watching." 30 days later, Beatrice, Joachim, and Effie finally vacated the property. They did not leave quietly. They packed their belongings in the middle of the night, loading up a rented moving truck and leaving the front door wide open. When Vivian and I walked into the house the next morning, the smell hit us first. It was a sour, stagnant odor of rotting garbage and spilled alcohol. They had absolutely trashed the place. I walked through the living room. The expensive, custom upholstered sofa I had bought for Vivian as a housewarming gift was completely ruined, stained with dark wine spills and covered in cigarette burns. A large antique mirror hanging in the hallway was shattered. The carpets in the guest bedrooms were heavily soiled and torn at the seams. In the kitchen, the marble countertops were deeply scratched, and the refrigerator was filled with rotting, moldy food. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, petty act of vandalism, executed by a group of angry, entitled people who realized they had lost their free ride. Vivian stood in the center of her ruined living room, looking at the destruction. She didn't cry. The sadness had finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, hardened resolve. "Call the property assessor," Vivian said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I want every single scratch documented." I smiled. My daughter was finally thinking like an auditor. We hired an independent, state-certified property damage assessor. He spent 3 hours walking through the house, photographing the stains, the broken glass, and the ruined furniture. He compiled a massive, itemized report detailing the exact cost of replacing the carpets, repairing the countertops, and deep cleaning the property. The total estimated damage came to exactly $8,700. I took the damage report and added it to the thick legal file sitting on my desk. Right next to it was the final, completed report from the forensic accountant I had hired to review Joachim's fake ledgers. The forensic report was devastating. It officially confirmed everything I had found in the bank statements. Joachim had systematically siphoned exactly $47,300 from Vivian's blooms over a period of 6 months. The money trail was undeniable. It showed direct transfers from the business account to Joachim's personal credit cards, massive cash withdrawals, and the exact routing numbers used to lease Beatrice's Lexus. We now had a total financial claim of $56,000 against them. 2 days after we finalized the reports, my cell phone rang again. It was an unknown number. I answered it. "Frank?" Beatrice said. Her voice was entirely different now. The hysterical, demanding tone was gone. She sounded small. She sounded desperate. "Hello, Beatrice," I replied. I received the demand letter from your lawyer," she stammered. "The $56,000. Frank, you have to understand, we don't have that kind of money lying around. Joachim's bar failed. We are barely scraping by right now. We are living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. You were living in a 3-bedroom house," I pointed out dryly, "until you destroyed it." "It was an accident," she pleaded. "The stains, the mirror. Things just got out of hand while we were moving. Look, Frank, can we set up a payment plan? Maybe $200 a month? If you take us to court, the legal fees alone will bankrupt us." I put the phone on speaker and pushed it across the table toward Vivian. Vivian looked at the phone. She thought about the bruises on her wrist. She thought about the 12-hour days she had worked for free, while Beatrice drove around in a luxury SUV bought with her money. Vivian leaned into the microphone. "You told me I couldn't afford a lawyer, Beatrice," Vivian said, her voice ringing with absolute unbreakable authority. "Now you are the one who can't afford the truth. We are not doing a payment plan. See you in court." When cornered, a narcissist will always play the victim. Beatrice realized that the legal walls were closing in on her. The power of attorney was gone. The bank accounts were frozen. The house was locked. She was facing a massive civil lawsuit and potential criminal charges. She had absolutely no leverage left in the real world. So she took her war to the internet. 3 days after Vivian refused her pathetic attempt at a payment plan, Beatrice launched a highly orchestrated, emotionally manipulative campaign on social media. She posted a massive, multi-paragraph essay on her local community Facebook group. "My heart is completely broken," the post began. "I am a grieving mother who lost her beautiful son, Brandon, just 6 months ago. Since his tragic passing, I have tried to do everything in my power to support his widow, Vivian. I stepped in to help her run her struggling flower shop. I moved into my son's old house to keep her company and ensure she wasn't lonely. And how does she repay me? She hired a ruthless corporate lawyer, locked me out of the business my son helped build, and evicted me onto the street with zero notice. She is trying to erase Brandon's memory entirely. I am currently living in a cramped apartment, crying every night for the son I lost, while she sits comfortably in the house he loved." She attached a photo of herself holding a framed picture of Brandon. Looking frail and devastated, it was a masterclass in weaponized sympathy, and in the echo chamber of local social media, it was incredibly effective. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments. People who had never met Beatrice, who knew absolutely nothing about the situation, began pouring out their outrage. They called Vivian a heartless monster. They called her a gold digger. They said she was disrespecting the memory of a dead man. Worse still, some people figured out which flower shop Vivian owned. A handful of one-star reviews suddenly appeared on the shop's Google page. A few angry strangers even called the shop's landline to yell at whoever answered. I was sitting in the back office when Vivian walked in, holding her phone. She looked physically ill. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through the venomous comments. "Dad," Vivian whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "They hate me. All these people. They think I am a monster. They think I threw a grieving mother out onto the street. Maybe this is too much. Maybe we should just drop the lawsuit." The social pressure was working. Beatrice was trying to bully my daughter into submission using the court of public opinion. I took the phone out of Vivian's hand and set it face down on the desk. "We do not negotiate with terrorists, Vivian," I said calmly, "and we certainly do not negotiate with Facebook comments." "But she is ruining my reputation," Vivian cried. "She is destroying the shop's image. If people believe her, no one will ever buy flowers from me again. Then we will make sure they do not believe her," I replied. I didn't respond to Beatrice's post. I didn't engage in petty online arguments. Engaging in a shouting match with a liar only validates their narrative. You do not fight a lie with more words. You fight a lie with undeniable, documented truth. I spent the next 48 hours organizing a highly specific counteroffensive. I didn't invite the entire internet. I invited the people who actually mattered in the local community. I sent out physical invitations to the shop's longest-standing corporate clients. The primary flower wholesalers who supplied our inventory, the owner of the popular coffee shop next door, and 2 former employees who had quit because they couldn't stand working under Beatrice's tyrannical rule. I invited them to a private, after-hours community meeting at Vivian's Blooms to address the recent rumors surrounding the business. On Thursday evening, 25 highly influential members of the local business community gathered in the center of the flower shop. They stood awkwardly among the orchids and the roses, murmuring to each other, clearly uncomfortable. They had all read the Facebook post. They all thought they were looking at a heartless widow who had evicted her dead husband's mother. I set up a large digital projector in the middle of the room, pointing it at a blank white wall. "Thank you all for coming," I said, stepping to the front of the room. I was wearing a sharp, tailored suit. I wasn't playing the part of a retired father. I was playing the part of a forensic auditor conducting a boardroom presentation. "You are all here because you have read certain allegations online regarding my daughter, Vivian, and her mother-in-law, Beatrice Quinn." I clicked a button on a remote control. The projector hummed to life. The first image that appeared on the wall was the massive, blown-up image of the formal legal deed to the flower shop and the house. "First," I said clearly, "Beatrice claimed she was locked out of the business her son helped build. As you can see from these documents, the property, the inventory, and the residential house were purchased entirely in cash by me, Frank Adams. My son-in-law, Brandon, was a wonderful man, but he never possessed a single shred of financial ownership over this business. It was always a sole proprietorship belonging to Vivian." A few people in the crowd exchanged confused glances. I clicked the button again. The image changed to a highly detailed spreadsheet, side by side with official bank statements. "Beatrice claimed she stepped in to help a struggling business," I continued, my voice remaining perfectly level. "This is the operating ledger created by her brother-in-law, Joachim. It shows massive losses. However, the bank statements on the right show where the money actually went." I began highlighting specific charges on the screen with a laser pointer. "Here is a $1,200 down payment for a brand new Lexus SUV, registered in Beatrice's name. Here is a $400 charge at a luxury day spa. Here is an $800 charge for a gold necklace, purchased on the exact day of Brandon's birthday. In total, Beatrice and Joachim misappropriated $47,300 from this business in less than 6 months." The silence in the room was deafening. The coffee shop owner next door let out a low whistle of shock. I wasn't finished. I clicked the remote one more time. The final image was the damage report from the property assessor, complete with high-resolution photographs of the shattered antique mirror, the wine-stained custom sofa, and the ruined carpets. "And finally," I said, "Beatrice claimed she was evicted from the home her son loved. She was issued a legal 30-day notice to vacate because she refused to pay rent. Before leaving, she and her family intentionally caused $8,700 in property damage to my daughter's home." I turned the projector off. The room plunged back into normal lighting. I looked at the 25 people standing in the shop. We did not evict a grieving mother. We evicted a criminal enterprise that was actively using my daughter's grief as a financial shield. I stepped back, allowing Vivian to step forward. She was incredibly brave. She stood in front of the crowd. Looking at the people she had known for years, she rolled up the sleeve of her sweater, exposing the fading but still highly visible purple bruise in the shape of fingers on her wrist. "Joachim did this to me when I tried to look at my own financial ledgers," Vivian said quietly. "Beatrice told me that if I didn't let her run the shop, it meant I never truly loved Brandon. She used his memory to steal from me. I was terrified, but I am not terrified anymore. This is my shop, and I am asking for your support." The shift in the room was instantaneous and absolute. The local business community is a tight-knit ecosystem. They despise fraud, and they deeply respect resilience. The owner of the coffee shop stepped forward and hugged Vivian. The primary flower wholesaler, a gruff older man, looked at me and nodded with profound respect. The next morning, the counteroffensive hit the internet. The people who had attended the meeting did not stay silent. The coffee shop owner wrote a massive post detailing the undeniable evidence he had seen, defending Vivian completely. The former employees chimed in, confirming Beatrice's toxic, tyrannical behavior behind the scenes. The narrative violently flipped. The strangers who had been attacking Vivian suddenly turned their outrage entirely on Beatrice. They flooded her original post, calling her a fraud, a thief, and a manipulative liar. By noon, Beatrice deleted her entire Facebook account. But the internet is forever. Screenshots of her original post, juxtaposed with the truth, circulated rapidly through the local community. Her reputation was utterly, irreparably destroyed. She had tried to use the court of public opinion to break us. Instead, we used the truth to burn her kingdom to the ground. There was only one court left to conquer. The courtroom was exactly as I preferred it, cold, quiet, and completely devoid of emotion. We were not in a high-drama criminal trial with a jury and sweeping theatrical speeches. We were in civil court, standing before a highly experienced, deeply cynical judge who possessed an absolute intolerance for nonsense. Civil court is a terrifying place for a liar because civil court does not care about your feelings. It only cares about evidence, liability, and the brutal, inescapable weight of financial restitution. Beatrice arrived at the courthouse alone. She did not have a lawyer. The flashy attorney she had initially retained to fight our civil suit had abruptly dropped her as a client 2 weeks earlier when he realized she had absolutely no money to pay his retainer, and more importantly, that she had lied to him about her legal authority over the flower shop. Joachim was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding from his own creditors, and Effie had vanished back into whatever lazy existence she had come from. Beatrice looked significantly older. The expensive blowout was gone. The pristine cashmere sweater was replaced by a slightly wrinkled blouse. The social media backlash had stripped her of her arrogant confidence, leaving her looking desperate and incredibly small. Vivian sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her posture perfectly straight. She was wearing a professional, tailored blazer. She did not look at her mother-in-law. She looked straight ahead at the judge. Sarah Vance, our attorney, stood up and presented our case. It was a flawless surgical execution. She did not talk about grief. She did not talk about Brandon. She simply handed the judge a 3-inch thick binder. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice crisp and clear. "Contained within this binder is a comprehensive forensic accounting report compiled by an independent auditor. It details exactly $47,300 in unauthorized transfers, cash withdrawals, and personal expenses executed by the defendant, Beatrice Quinn, and her proxy, Joachim, using my client's commercial accounts." The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s, put on her reading glasses and opened the binder. "Exhibit B," Sarah continued, seamlessly moving to the next piece of evidence, "contains the certified bank statements demonstrating that the defendant utilized these misappropriated funds to lease a luxury vehicle, frequent day spas, and purchase expensive jewelry. Exhibit C contains the itemized property damage report detailing $8,700 in intentional vandalism to my client's residential property prior to the defendant's eviction." The judge flipped slowly through the pages, her expression remaining entirely neutral. She looked at the highlighted bank charges. She looked at the photos of the ruined sofa and the shattered mirror. "Mrs. Quinn," the judge finally said, looking over her glasses at Beatrice, who was standing alone at the defendant's table, "do you have any documented evidence to refute the findings in this forensic report? Do you have any receipts indicating these expenses were authorized business expenditures?" Beatrice gripped the edge of the wooden table. Her hands were shaking. She fell back on the only weapon she had ever known how to use. "Your Honor," Beatrice said, her voice immediately wavering with theatrical tears, "you have to understand the context. My son, Brandon, died unexpectedly 6 months ago. I was completely devastated. We were all devastated. Vivian was falling apart. She couldn't handle the stress of the business. I only stepped in to help her. I am a grieving mother. Everything I did because I was trying to hold my family together." The judge stared at her. The silence in the courtroom was incredibly heavy. "Are you stating that your grief somehow authorized you to spend $800 on a gold necklace using funds from a business you did not own?" the judge asked, her tone entirely flat. "I was not thinking clearly," Beatrice pleaded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I was in mourning. Vivian is trying to punish me because she feels guilty about moving on from my son. She is trying to ruin me." The judge let out a long, exhausted sigh. She closed the 3-inch binder and folded her hands on the bench. Miss Quinn," the judge said, her voice suddenly dropping an octave, carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of the law. "Grief is a tragedy. It is not a defense for embezzlement. Grief does not give you permission to steal. Beatrice flinched as if she had been slapped. You did not accidentally commingle funds, the judge continued relentlessly. You systematically executed a hostile financial takeover of a vulnerable woman's business. You utilized a power of attorney to siphon tens of thousands of dollars to fund a luxury lifestyle, and when your access was legally revoked, you intentionally vandalized her home out of spite. I find your actions to be entirely malicious, premeditated, and completely devoid of any legal justification. The judge picked up her pen. I am entering a summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff in the total amount of $56,000, representing the stolen funds and the property damage. Furthermore, I am ordering the defendant to pay all of the plaintiff's legal fees and court costs associated with this action. Beatrice gasped, gripping the table for support. Your Honor, I don't have that kind of money. I am living in an apartment. I can't pay that. The judge did not even look up from the paperwork she was signing. That is no longer the plaintiff's problem, Miss Quinn. It is yours. If you fail to satisfy this judgment within 30 days, the plaintiff is fully authorized to begin asset seizure. Furthermore, based on the documented physical intimidation by your associate, Joachim, I am granting the plaintiff's request for a permanent restraining order. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of Vivian Adams, her residence, or her place of business. If you violate this order, you will be immediately arrested. The judge struck her gavel against the sounding block. The sharp wooden crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. We are adjourned. It was over. It was a complete, unconditional victory. I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. I looked at Beatrice. She was standing frozen at the defendant's table, staring at the empty space where the judge had just destroyed her life. The arrogant, manipulative woman who had terrorized my daughter was gone, replaced by a terrified, financially ruined shell. Vivian stood up beside me. She didn't gloat, she didn't sneer. She simply picked up her purse and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her mother-in-law completely alone in the silence. The consequences of the judgment were swift and utterly merciless. We did not wait for Beatrice to offer a payment plan. On the 31st day, Sarah Vance initiated aggressive asset seizure protocols. We legally garnished the small pension Beatrice received from her late husband. We filed a lien against her personal bank accounts, and the most satisfying moment of the entire process occurred 2 weeks later, when a tow truck arrived at Beatrice's cramped apartment complex. Because she had leased the luxury Lexus SUV using Vivian's business credit line, we had the legal authority to reclaim the vehicle. I watched from down the street as the tow truck driver hooked the pristine white SUV and dragged it away, leaving Beatrice standing on the sidewalk, screaming at the driver, completely stripped of her wealthy facade. Joachim did not escape the blast radius. The state tax auditors had finished their investigation into the flower shop. Because Joachim had signed the fraudulent financial reports as the acting accountant, he was held personally liable for severe tax penalties. Facing potential jail time for tax evasion, he was forced to liquidate the remaining assets from his failed sports bar and take a grueling, minimum-wage job working the night shift in a massive shipping warehouse just to pay off the IRS. His days of pretending to be a wealthy corporate executive were permanently over. Effie, the arrogant manager who had sneered at me on my first visit to the shop, quietly disappeared. Moving back to another state after the social media backlash made it impossible for her to find a respectable job in our community. They had tried to turn my daughter into a victim. They had tried to use her grief as a weapon to strip her of her dignity and her financial independence. But they had made one critical, fatal error. They had forgotten that Vivian had a father. And they had vastly underestimated the terrifying, inescapable power of a man who knows how to follow the money. The healing process is never a sudden, cinematic moment of triumph. It is a slow, quiet reconstruction. built one day at a time, until you suddenly realize you are no longer standing in the ruins. 6 months after we walked out of that courtroom, Vivian's blooms was unrecognizable from the dark, oppressive environment Beatrice had created. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere was completely gone, replaced by the warm, vibrant energy of a thriving small business. The front window displays were bright and meticulously arranged. The custom mahogany counter I had built was polished and clear. Vivian had hired 2 genuine, hard-working employees, a young college student studying botany and an older retired woman who possessed a remarkably green thumb. The employees were paid a fair wage, treated with respect, and most importantly, the accounting was handled by a certified, independent bookkeeping firm. The commercial credit line was fully restored and strictly managed. The business was not just surviving, it was genuinely flourishing. And Vivian herself had transformed. The pale, exhausted ghost with bruised wrists was entirely gone. She had gained back the weight she had lost. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She still missed Brandon. Of course, the grief of losing a spouse never truly disappears, but the grief was no longer a weapon that could be used against her. It was simply a scar, a part of her history, rather than the defining feature of her present existence. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I pulled my car up to the curb outside the shop. I did not walk in empty-handed. I was carrying a large, heavy planter box made of beautifully sanded cedar wood. I had spent the last 2 weekends building it in my garage, carefully joining the corners and sealing the wood to protect it from water damage. The brass bell jingled cheerfully as I pushed open the front door. Vivian was standing behind the counter, laughing as she arranged a massive bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers. She was wearing a clean canvas apron, and her hands, though still bearing the faint silvery scars of old rose thorns, were strong and steady. "Dad," she smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. She came around the counter and hugged me tightly. "You didn't tell me you were coming by today." "What is that?" "I brought you something for the front window display," I said, setting the heavy cedar planter box down near the glass. "I thought it might look good filled with those purple irises you were telling me about." Vivian ran her hand over the smooth wood, her eyes softening. "It's beautiful, thank you." I watched her for a moment, absorbing the profound difference in her demeanor. She was standing tall. She was in control of her own space. "Have you had any trouble?" I asked quietly, not needing to specify who I was referring to. Vivian shook her head. "No, the restraining order is still in place. I saw Beatrice walking down the opposite side of the street a few weeks ago. She looked over at the shop, but she didn't cross the road. She just kept walking." "Are you okay?" I asked, watching her face carefully. Vivian looked out the window toward the busy sidewalk where her mother-in-law had once stood and threatened to ruin her life. "I am," Vivian said, and I knew she was telling the absolute truth. I used to be so terrified of her. I used to be so angry that she tried to take this away from me. But honestly, Dad, I don't hate her anymore. I just don't care. She is a sad, greedy woman who lost everything because she couldn't stop taking. She can't hurt me now. She had achieved the ultimate victory. She had not only reclaimed her business and her home, but she had reclaimed her peace of mind. Beatrice was no longer a monster haunting her thoughts. She was simply irrelevant. Vivian walked back behind the counter. Hanging on the wall directly behind the cash register, framed in simple, elegant black wood, was the official certified deed to the commercial property. It wasn't there to brag to the customers. It was there for Vivian. It was a daily, undeniable reminder of exactly who owned the space she was standing in. I gave my daughter a flower shop because I wanted her to grow something beautiful after the devastating trauma of grief. I didn't just buy it as an investment. That shop wasn't just inventory, retail space, and commercial rent. It was the last dream my late wife, Vivian's mother, never got the chance to finish. My wife had always talked about opening a place exactly like this, a place filled with life and color, where people came to celebrate marriages, births, and anniversaries. Beatrice Quinn hadn't just tried to steal a business. She had tried to steal my family's legacy. She had tried to poison it, and she had tried to make my daughter work inside it like an unpaid servant trapped in a cage of guilt. But thieves, especially greedy ones who operate entirely on emotion and manipulation, always make one critical mistake. They think ownership is about who shouts the loudest. They think power is about who can exert the most psychological pressure on the most vulnerable person in the room. They are wrong. I spent 40 years of my life proving ownership with paper, numbers, and undeniable truth. I spent my career dismantling corporate lies by simply following the trail of the money. When someone attacks my family, I do not lose my temper. I do not shout in the streets. I gather the ledgers. I audit the accounts. I methodically remove every single pillar of their fraudulent empire until gravity does the rest of the work. And by the time I was finished with Beatrice Quinn, Vivian had her shop back, her house back, and her life back. Beatrice was left with a massive legal judgment she would carry for the rest of her miserable life, a repossessed luxury car, and a public reputation completely in ruins. I looked around the bright, bustling shop. I smelled the fresh earth and the blooming flowers. I looked at my daughter, smiling as she helped a young couple pick out arrangements for their upcoming wedding. I had followed the money, I had broken the lock, and I had finally given her back the life that was always hers. Every single flower in that window finally belonged to my daughter again, and no one would ever try to take them away again.